Good morning, folks. I'm Dan. This is part 6 and the final in this series on forming ribs. And what we're going to do today is I'm going to go ahead, cut the lightning holes, and then we're going to press the flanges in the ribs that we've previously formed. We've got them to this stage. And after that, well, I think we're just going to sit down and I'm going to kind of ramble on about my thoughts about these ribs. So if that interests you, hang around. May have a little bit of something at the end that you might find enjoyable. So let's go ahead and get into it. Alright, well, we'll just go ahead and we're going to cut our lightning holes. Today I'm going to cut them with a hole saw. 115 millimeter holes. This is, I think, a 114 millimeter hole saw, but we'll just polish the edges. They have to be polished anyway, and they'll fit my flanging dies quite well. So these can be cut several ways, as we talked about before. There could be a router template setup, which I've kind of gone away from. I've got a fly cutter set up for this morning. This was just easier to do it. Fly cutter has the advantage of you can adjust your sizes a little bit more to adapt to your flanging dies. Whatever works. They're usually close enough that it doesn't matter. This, I believe, this hole is just a little bit small for my flanging dies, so that's part of the reason I will normally set up and use a fly cutter. I use the same process for both. Fly cutters can be kind of dangerous. I normally, always, if I'm using a fly cutter, I'll clamp the blank down to the table so it can't move because it has the potential to grab. This does too, but it's not nearly as bad, and I'm not overly concerned about it. So I'm just going to go ahead and run these through, and we'll cut out the center holes in these. That easy, nice round hole. We'll go ahead and I'll drill the other one, and then we'll go ahead and deburr them and polish them up. Okay, I'm just going to deburr the edges here. I haven't ran a deburring file or anything through there. What I'm going to do is I just set up a loose flap wheel here in the drill press, just because I've already got the camera set up and it's convenient. A lot of times I will do this even in a hand drill will work fine to deburr these. You just want to make sure that you smooth these quite well, because they will crack out when you go to flange them, especially on the smaller ones with the tighter hole clearances. Why they will split out there. So be sure and deburr them real well. Okay, both of those holes are fit to size. They're deburred, so they're nice and smooth. You don't cut your fingers. You can do that all day long and they'll work well. So the next thing is we'll just take them back to the press, and we will use our little hillsgun flanging dies to press them out. And here will be the last part of this little video series. We're going to go ahead and press our flanges in, and that will take care of the rest of it. Now, as I said before, I recommend you put the bottom part against the yeah, maybe those will fit in there. We'll probably have to drop it down one. Bottom part of the flanging dies with the female portion pointing down. I think you stress those flanging dies less by doing it that way. And the flange goes this way. So we just set them together like that. And I guess I'm burying a little bit here already. I've been spraying these down with lemon pledge. I think it just adds a little more lubrication to them. I don't think it hurts a thing. Plus, it makes your shop smell nice. Underneath, let's get a plate on top. There's our first flange, just like that. All the way around. Let's do the last one. Done deal. Let me grab a rag and wipe those down. Okay, this will finish up that series on building these ribs. What I am going to do is we'll go back in. I think I'll sit down at the desk and we'll kind of go over mistakes that I think I've made and what I would do differently if I was doing this. So we got a little bit of a bow in there, which we can take out. Let me grab flanging pliers. Let me grab my fluting pliers. I seem to be having a problem between flanges and flutes. I really do know the difference. Now we're a little bit out of shape here on the nose, and it's all right here at the nose. And we can flatten those out just by adding a little more flute to the places that need it. And we can do these on a flat bench, but since I'm too lazy to move the camera around, let's just go ahead and take up a little bit of this material here on the as we work those flutes down, why it will curve it back the other way. I've got a couple of ribs that match pretty close there now. I've got just a little bit right there. But that in reality is not enough flex to where I'm going to be concerned about it, I don't think. Yeah, and the rest of that can be flattened out just by straightening our ribs here just a little. That one's a little bit. Yeah, those are both up a little bit. But yeah, there we've got 2 usable ribs. There's some things that I would do different, and we'll talk about those. Let's go back in and sit down and we can discuss the world here. Let's do our little recap here about wing ribs, nose ribs, and I told you I'd tell you what I'd do different and what I'd do the same and mistakes I made. There was a lot of mistakes along the way. This is the first rib that I formed. They were all cut the same way. Well, let's backtrack a little bit. Things I would do differently on these 2 ribs. Layout of them went fine. I'd use that layout again. I do it exactly the same way when I drew them out. For cutting templates, I would go back and shorten my flanges just a little bit more. You saw in one of the first parts that I went back and extended the flange a little bit because I thought it was a little bit shy on that. It showed about 15 to 16 millimeters measured out on the flange the way I'd laid it out. The plans called for 17 millimeters, so I went and when I remarked those, I ran them out to right at 17 millimeters. It measured out real well. When I formed those the way they formed over the form blocks and everything, I ended up with about 19 or 20. So I would have stayed with my original form blocks or flange lengths on those plans. So what I would do if I was going to use those templates was that cutting template is I'd go back and I'd sand the edges to get that flange back down to just about where it was. So measuring that out at 15 to 16 millimeters would have been right by the time I formed it over the edge, did my rollover and everything, and I would have come out with my 17 millimeter flange or very close to that. So any of the things you do along the way, usually you're going to want to make 1 or 2 test pieces and then adjust your process a little bit to make it match. So I would have done that. Relief holes, I would go back and cut them in the cutting template just a little bit smaller. I oversized them a little bit more. So I've got edge distance wise on the back edge on both of them. Edge distance is just right to fit in between the spars. I've got just the right amount. So the first rivets going in would have the 10 millimeter clearance. On the top, we're fine there too. That one's fine. Like I say, I'd run that relief hole back just a little bit farther to get, we're kind of coming to a sharp point. It'd be okay, but I'd like a little bit more there. The bottom, I'd extend that just back just a little bit more. We're a little bit close there. We'd still get our edge distance, but it's a little bit closer than I would like it to be. Other than that, everything looks pretty good. The out of the ribs when I formed them, this was the first rib that I formed. And if you'll remember, I went back after I'd started forming it and I trimmed the nose radius back on this a little bit. I ended up with kind of a ragged nose radius on that. This rib I would scrap. I'd replace this rib, but I'd consider it a test rib, and that's part of the process to learn it. This rib would be okay. I could straighten this line up and smooth this. I've got a little bit of a catch there that would have to be sanded out and smooth. Otherwise, that nose would be all right. I just don't really care for it. Other things I would change, especially on the first one, I flanged them a little bit too deep. I flanged them a little bit too far up over the edge, and that was me working the metal a little bit more. So I'm a little bit sharp on the points right there where the flanges meet the radius on the top edge of that rib. It's okay, but it's still a little bit more than I would like it. So I changed that, and I went back and you saw me cut the reliefs in the form blocks a little bit deeper and a little bit angled farther back. That allowed me to get a little more radius in there and get them to form a little bit more. These nose ribs, both would be acceptable. Like I say, this one I would not use. This one I would use. Otherwise, they look pretty good. I would still go back and increase the cutouts for the flutes a little bit deeper than I already did. I seem to be having a problem knowing the difference between flutes and flanges. I seem to be wanting to call a flute a flange quite a bit here. But I would go back and relieve that flute depth a little bit more so I could get a little more depth into that. Otherwise, they're fine. They flanged fine. I'd flange them exactly the same. Of course, I've done enough with that process that comes out well. I've not built a set of actual form blocks and cutting templates for several years now because mine were already done for the 701. This was done strictly as a demonstration purpose. And after having not done it for that long, I'm kind of a new guy to this. You know, I knew how I wanted to form them and everything, but somebody just starting out would face these same hurdles and a few more going along the way. It's not a hard task, not anything that anybody can accomplish. It's just something that you have to take the time and stop and think. Everything that you do here is going to make a difference with something else. Where the rivet spacing goes through on the top of your ribs and these layout. I don't remember the dimensions. I was looking at the plans yesterday. I think we go 27 millimeters from the center of the spar to this first hole, and then we go another 33 to this, and then it's a 40 pitch for the other, for a total of whatever it is. And our last rivet hole is right here. Yeah, this would be the better of the two ribs. On this one, it's not an issue on the bottom where it starts coming down at the top. Our last rivet goes in this flange here, and if you look, that's where it's starting to taper down in, and that's what I talked about earlier about wanting to make sure you've got proper edge distance there, so you can leave those a little bit fatter going down through and then narrow them down. So that's just things you need to take into account. Make sure your flutes all line up so they're in between your flanges. And when I laid these out and measured them out, they all fall within specifications, but they're not all right in the middle of the rib. I've got a couple of them that are off a little bit, so it's worth going back, seeing what the rivet layout is on the sheet that shows your skins, your top skins, and just compare where those rivets are going to go with where you've laid out your flutes. Otherwise, that pretty much ends everything I had to say about this. Did have one comment where it was suggested that I make sure you're working off of the latest edition of the plans. So you do want to be sure you're working on the latest edition of the plans. I've actually addressed that a little bit in a video that I've already shot. I haven't released it yet, but that will cover that a little bit more, so stay tuned for that. I now have a set of nose rib cutting blocks and form blocks. They would take a little bit of tweaking to be functional. They're for a 701, but if anybody's interested in those form blocks, I'll send them to whoever wants them, I guess. If you're interested in those form blocks and want them in the cutting templates, why, go to my website listed down below in the description and send me a message through the website telling me you want those nose ribs or those nose form blocks and why you want them, and we'll find somebody to send those out to. So anyway, I appreciate you guys sticking with me this long through all of this long process. I've made mistakes along the way. Hopefully you can learn from those mistakes. Hopefully I've given you some ideas to help you along a little bit with your build. So thanks for taking the time to watch.